Beautiful. That's beautiful. You know, I'm really, really pleased to be here, honored to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Uh, I'm especially pleased because of that balcony full of gastronomes, young gastronomes up in the top. Uh, and I just want to say that this is the cover of the book that we made for the 40th birthday of Chez Panisse. And so I'm going to use some of the photographs from that book to illustrate my talk today. It is called The Power of Gathering. And I think that's what's happening at this event. It is creating something that's greater than the sum of the parts. And that's where we need to be as a global movement. And so I will begin. I can never be in Mexico, anywhere in Mexico really, without thinking about my friend, Diana Kennedy. I'm sure many of you know her personally. Diana's mission has been to introduce us to much of what is going on and has been going on in this country for centuries. She's gathered and translated a wide range of Mexican recipes and cataloged so many of the traditional ways of cooking. And at 91, she's still at it. I think I learned everything I know about peppers from Diana. In a sense, she's created a deep, practical library of indigenous Mexican ingredients and practices. It's such a huge treasure chest. 25 years ago, Diana took me to visit the Mendoza sisters, who had a restaurant in the courtyard of their family house in Oaxaca. And it was such a revelation to me way back then to have everything made by hand. And I tasted things that I'd never tasted before, things that I've just grown to love, like blue corn tortillas right off the comal and cactus fruit. And on that same trip, I visited Diana's house and her farm in Michoacan. And I was so impressed with the biodiversity of her little garden and her radical ecological system, which I know she learned from those she lived with and her neighbors who lived around her. Which brings me to what I want to talk to you about today. Something I think we all need to embrace, and that is the land, our connection to it, and our responsibility to take care of it. Whether we live in cities or in the country or on the coast or in the mountains, we are all eaters. We all rely in one form or another on agriculture. And I worry because of the pervasive and toxic global presence of slow food culture. It's distracting us from the real issues. It's causing us to lose a true sense of what a connection to the land, what it feels like, and how that connection feeds us. And if we don't counteract the insidious and almost invisible forces of fast food culture, I fear that we're lost. As Frida Kahlo said, and I only just read this the other day when I visited her house, quote, "If we are not our colors, our aromas, our people, who are we? Nothing. Nothing." One of the best ways I know of fighting fast food culture is by entering into a positive relationship with nature. And one of the most effective ways of doing this, and one of the most pleasurable, is, of course, through food. I know when we started growing our own food at Chez Panisse many years ago, is when things really started to change for us. Not only did we start cooking better, but we also literally experience firsthand how dependent we are on the soil. Chez Panisse's first garden, by the way, was in my backyard. I was longing for a mesclun salad, that very special French salad made of distinctive sweet and bitter greens and herbs, which you couldn't find in the United States back in 1971. Personally, I'd been sort of daunted by the thought of growing my own food, but driven by the desire for flavor, we turned my backyard into a salad garden. Our success surprised and delighted us and our customers. Fast food culture is relentlessly telling us that growing our own food, or cooking for that matter, is too much work. It takes too much time. It requires a certain climate and a certain amount of space. But that's not so. As people around the world have known for centuries, growing our own food can be pleasurable and affordable, and sometimes a matter of survival. When I was very young, my family, who didn't have much money and who were not gardeners, to say the least, planted a victory garden in our New Jersey backyard. And we were not alone. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the victory gardens, but during World War II, United States citizens were asked to plant vegetable gardens in their yards as part of the war effort. And Eleanor Roosevelt was leading the charge with her garden on the White House lawn. More than 20 million victory gardens were planted, and they produced more than 9 million tons of fresh vegetables and fruits. The Victory Garden movement not only helped our country through a very hard time, but it helped many people, like my family, realize we could grow our own food, that it was possible. It empowered us. And I find it incredibly inspiring that in Washington now, the White House has a kitchen garden again, after too many years without one. And it's such an important symbol. I think any government building anywhere that has a vegetable garden or an edible landscape on its grounds is sending a vital message about stewardship of the land. It's incredible that the Pope wants to plant food on all the Vatican lands. Can you imagine? And maybe you know that Obama recently went to visit the Pope, and he brought seeds to the Pope from his White House garden just to help the project along. Well, back in the 80s, as the patronage of Chez Panisse started to grow and we opened the cafe, we had to figure out ways to provide ourselves with larger amounts of the same quality ingredients we'd been getting by gardening and foraging for ingredients. And that inspired us to grow our own independent network of organic farms and purveyors. Today, we have a farm of our own. We actually take the compost every day or every other day up to the farm and bring back our vegetables. There are nearly 85 people that are part of this network. Some of them organic and some of them way more than organic. And we support each other, much like the community-supported agriculture movement. I think you probably know about that, where people make a commitment to buy vegetables from a farm, and they're willing to take whatever the farmer has to offer. Well, that's the kind of arrangement that we have with our farm. Well, this fostered our own kind of underground sustainable economy, free from the constraints and contradictions of the larger, more pervasive industrial economy. Besides bringing delicious food into the restaurant, this network also connects everyone, cooks and patrons alike, to the land. And it makes us all, by association, stewards of the land. It's the main reason why, for us, naming farmers on our daily menus is so important. It keeps that connection between the patrons and the suppliers alive. And it encourages the producers to grow food in the best possible way to meet the expectations that we have at the restaurant. But we still struggle with this at Chez Panisse. We are always trying to discern and clarify whether we are truly growing food in the best possible way. It's never a finished job. It's right now, there's a big focus on sourcing enough organic feed for animals. You might be raising animals in a humane way, but feeding them non-organic grain is inherently inconsistent. And many California ranchers are turning to China for organic feed. But how sustainable is this? It's a deep problem, and we're working with other restaurateurs and farmers and ranchers to find solutions. It's one of the main reasons that I'm here. I want to know what's happening in Mexico and in other countries. I want to know how they're solving the problems, and I want to know what their best practices are. The big point is, when we don't buy real food from real farmers and ranchers and fishermen, not only does our environment suffer, but the whole culture suffers. We need to be constantly vigilant. I think of the tragic example of Les Halles in Paris. When they moved that beautiful old market from the center of the city many years ago, and they moved it out to a modern facility down by the airport, they gave priority to international vendors over local sustainable growers. And this dramatically changed the food, not only in Paris, but all over France. And the original market, by the way, was a safety net for the poor. What wasn't sold that day was given to those in need. And I don't think that's happening right now. However, sometimes a dramatic change can have good consequences to the food system. For example, when mad cow disease broke out in England, everybody became terrified about the food, how the food was produced. And thankfully, restaurant activists and others took the lead and connected farms to restaurants. And the food changed quickly in Britain for the better. That's why I'm so supportive of organic farmers' markets. These markets are a way to ensure connecting our customers and ourselves with real farms and sustainable agriculture, not just a middleman or distributors that pretend to be real. Signage that can be validated by sort of looking the vendor right in the eye is critical, very critical at this moment in time, because fast food culture can invade farmers' markets and fool us into buying products that look the part, but are in fact far from it. The transformational aspects of gardening and growing food we experience firsthand at Chez Panisse can be passed on to the next generation in an extraordinary way. Children are actually hungry for it. The Edible Schoolyard Project at Martin Luther King Middle School, a public school in Berkeley, California, has proven to me that schools are the most fertile grounds for change. I founded the Edible Schoolyard Project 20 years ago, And yet every time I see students measuring the vegetable beds for the math class, or harvesting ancient grains for the history class, or stealing a taste of raspberry, I'm reminded that there's nothing more life-changing than the experience of being in nature. We have been separated from it, but as soon as we dig our hands into the soil and start watching things grow, we fall in love effortlessly. We realize that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. This connection to and respect for nature can be awakened in all of us. It's the one place where we can reach children while they're still young and open to learning. It's also the place, and this is very, very important, that we can feed all children for free and end childhood hunger. How great would it be if school cafeterias supported small farms and those farms supported school cafeterias? How great would that be? I love the green rooftop project here in Mexico City. It's an amazing example of this. In fact, I find it so beautiful that in a modern metropolis, which was built on top of an ancient Aztec city, very famous for its floating gardens in a lake, that now there are these floating gardens in the sky, which are doing so many of the things that I'm talking about: feeding people, forging connections to nature, restoring the environment. It's just fantastic. And I was very delighted to hear that there are many chefs who have garden plots along the canal who are growing food for their restaurants. Perhaps one of the most provocative projects that I know about is called Green Grounds in South Central LA. Ron Finley, who is an artist and self-proclaimed guerrilla gardener, you should see his TED Talk if you haven't. It's fantastic. Well, he started planting the streets and sidewalks. He planted between the street and the sidewalk in this broken down, fast food infested inner city neighborhood. And he started planting it with organic crops. He wanted to inspire the community filled with gang members and school dropouts in such a way they would see new possibilities for themselves. And it was such a radical appropriation of public property that the city of Los Angeles at first tried to, of course, shut him down. But the court upheld Ron's right to plant his urban environment. Now, anybody who wants to can, and usually does, pitch in when they pass those fields that are growing out of the cracks in the cement. Wouldn't it be great if all cities and towns planted edible landscapes right now when hunger is so prevalent? Wouldn't it be fantastic? Well, my friend Carlo Petrini, you see him up there. He comes to Mexico, I know, whenever he can. He loves being here. And I still remember when we gathered in Puebla for a slow food meeting. And Carlos said at that meeting that cooks need to be gardeners and gardeners need to be cooks. And they need to be connected in this way. They're as co-producers in order to ensure the stability of our food system. And I always thought that I understood what Carlo meant. But recently, because of my reflections on growing food in my own life, I've come to a much deeper understanding of what that means. We truly are what we eat. And when we eat fast food, we digest not only the adulterated ingredients, but we digest the values of that culture the values of fast, cheap, and easy. Everything the same, available 24 hours. We want the world like that, the world like that. But when we eat slow food, we adopt the values of another culture, the values of the land. Well, in the United States, I think Thomas Jefferson must have been a slow food president. 250 years ago, he was a celebrated farmer gastronome. And he had an adventurous palate and a profound respect for agrarian values. His predecessor, believe it or not, George Washington, preferred to be a farmer than to perform his presidential duties. His predecessor, yes, but Jefferson planted his garden for the pleasures of the table. And he combed the world for interesting and tasty plants to grow. He was a leader, so everything he did got transmitted to the public at large. I just love knowing that he planted a thimbleful of lettuce seeds every week so that he could always have a salad on his table. Today, Monticello, where he lived, is more than a landmark. It's a national treasury of heirloom seeds, a place of enduring values, where I believe the roots of American democracy still thrive, or I hope they do. Now, this is a picture up here that I think is kind of amazing. I don't know whether you saw this a couple years ago in the front page of the New York Times. But the young farmers of France organized and put a garden all the way down the Champs-Élysées. And I just want to end here because I believe that all of us need to bring back respect and support for these practices and values, not only for the pleasure of our lives, but for the survival of this planet. We cooks and restaurateurs and people who eat with intention, you know, we're on the front lines. We're the leaders. And we can revive the spirit of the victory gardens of years ago and inspire a global phenomenon. And if we do this in our cafes, in our food trucks, in our restaurants, in our hospitals, in our jails, our homes, but most importantly, in our schools, we can bring everyone back to their senses. And what a delicious, revolutionary idea this is. That by demonstrating the vital link between what we're eating and the land, we can bring about a powerful cultural shift, one that will nourish us and will bring back the meaning and beauty to our lives. Thank you so much. Thank you.